Can you imagine having to fire a client? Sometimes it's your fiduciary responsibility to do so, as well as setting up very clear boundaries. And we're going to talk about that today on Black Ram TV's Gaining Ground. My name is Daniela Sagia, and I am Chief Strategist and Creative Director at Black Ram Media Group, Inc. Thank you for joining us today on our podcast. Firing clients, I have had to do that, and it's not comfortable, it's scary, but sometimes it's the only thing to do. So let's talk about it. 80% of the money you make is going to come from 20% of your clientele. You're also going to find that 80% of your problems or time consumption is going to be serving 20% of your clientele, and that those two groups are not the same people. They're different groups of your clients. So if you look at your client list now, you're going to see that the ones that make you the most money usually are the least amount of problems. They talk the least, they're standing orders, let's say, or you know what they like. So there's very little going back and forth to finish a product, and they're clear, they're organized, they can afford you. There's no nickel and diming. They don't question anything. Those are your dream clients. Then you're going to have some, and it's funny because the ones that are problematic usually come with this massive ego where they act as though it's a privilege for you to, donate all your time to them for free. So they're going to nickel and dime you on every job you give them. They're late paying their invoices. You got to go back and forth a million times to finish the product they want. There's constant changes and complaints, and they're texting you at all hours, a million revisions. So these are the things that you're going to see. And at some point, you have to do the math to say, okay, listen, the amount of hours I put in just to, bill them a $200 invoice, at the end of the day, these people are paying me 5 cents an hour. It's not worth doing it. I would rather lose that business because it gives me the time freedom to find the better client. Because if these guys are taking up all your time, you don't even have room for a better quality client. So in those situations, sometimes it's best that you end the relationship. Other situations can occur. So for example, like in my field in consulting, if my client is not coachable, they're going to waste their money on me because they're not going to be willing to make the changes or make the efforts required to be successful. So then when they don't succeed, that could be a reflection on me. When they're a hot mess and are constantly creating problems, that reflects on me. So there are some clients that I don't even want because they're a hot mess, and I don't want to have to deal with that because they don't pay me enough to deal with that. And then sometimes, you make mistakes early on and I know that at Black Ram Media Group, when Maria and I first started, we did this, where we would often donate our services and donate our time or our skill set so that just for social proof, so that we could say that we worked with a specific brand. And, and then you're spending so much time donating that you're not spending a lot of time selling. And another mistake that we also made is we would sometimes feel sorry for clients that couldn't afford us. So if we saw a brand come in that had amazing potential and we knew that with the right media, they would be incredibly successful, we would lowball our services to be kind. This was, we like you, we really want to see you start out, so we're going to create a package for you that we know you can afford, that we know is going to make you money, so that then you'll be able to afford us. And what would happen time and time again, this isn't something that just happened once, this happened time and time again, when that brand then inevitably took off and they started making the kind of money that enabled them to afford us. At this point, they've told themselves that we were equal to them when they were still small beans. So then they decide to move their services, now that they can afford it, to the media companies that wouldn't even look at them before. So we shot ourselves in the foot by being kind. So thankfully, years ago, Maria and I got over that. we actually got over that right quick and decided to, you know what? Let's instead, we'll create courses so people that can't afford us can DIY and enough of their media to start making enough revenue to then be able to afford us. And because they have to work up to having, to being able to afford us, when they do get us as their media rep, they treat it with the gravitas that it warrants, right? And then those relationships have all lasted years and years and years. We've been working with the same companies and the same people now for years and growing in that direction. And that's a really fantastic place to be in. But in the beginning, because we were doing this and, we lost clients because, like I said, they jumped to somebody else, or we just stopped fighting for the same business because, again, the clients were problematic in one way or another, and instead shifted our focus in areas that were more stable. Even in terms of my political strategy, I still work with corporate clientele because politics is feast and famine, right? So when there's election around, you're very, very busy, but then in between elections, you get a lull, where with corporate work, it's pretty steady. So by having the balance of the two, which means I had to make room for that. So one of my biggest corporate clients takes up a lot of my time, and it's worth every penny or every minute of that time to give to them, because there's a massive potential there of steady revenue. But I had to make room for them by letting go of some of the smaller clientele, for example, that took up a lot of my time for very small billings, right? So I had to shift away and pivot my business to the kind of clientele that serves me. Now, when we talk about boundaries, that's something you have to do for your own sanity and your own, work-life balance, let's say. And one of the things in consulting, it's easy to do, is for casual conversations to become a free consult, right? So that can become quite painful. And when you start adding up how many free phone calls you've had with people, you could cry at the end of the day. So what I did was, I have an app that's on my watch and it's on my phone. And anytime, if I'm having a social conversation and then my client pivots, so since I have you on the phone, let me pick your brain about this, I will look at the clock and say, okay, it's 5:15, and I'll type it in that moment. And then when the conversation is over, or that portion of the conversation is, oh, look, it's 5:28 now, I'll put that in. And at the end of the month, I can hit a tally button and it will generate an invoice for the amount of time I've spent, off and on throughout the month with a specific client. And I found that since I've started issuing those invoices, people are very discerning of when they call me, or very careful of when they start asking me professional questions, because they know at the end of the month, they're going to receive an invoice. And that also makes our conversations very efficient, because, my clients will tend to be more succinct now that they're being charged by the minute. So I found that to be a really important tool, because, again, every minute you're dedicating to something that is not generating revenue, it's not generating revenue. And that's extremely problematic at the end of the year, when you find that you've donated more time than you've billed for. And then and now you've got to work 12, 14, 16 hours just to make the kind of money that you could have made in 8 hours had you billed appropriately. So these were the kind of boundaries I had to learn, in order to actually get paid what I'm worth, and for my time to be respected, because it had to be seen as valuable. Because if I didn't see it as valuable and treat it as valuable, neither did anybody else. And then you find that if you don't do these things, then you end up resenting clients you should be grateful to have, right? And then that resentment becomes quite toxic. So in order to avoid that from happening, a relationship has to be reciprocal. So if you're constantly giving, and they're not, responding with equal energy, let's say in money, that becomes a problem for you, right? So to avoid all that from happening, set the boundary at the outset. And learn when you shouldn't fight for a business, or you shouldn't fight to keep a customer. Letting some customers go gives you the actual space to find a client that is more up your alley and beneficial. And on that note, also know that you start to judge things. If you want to have a successful business, you need to judge things by the revenue that it generates, which means every minute of your time that has a price, and you have to figure out what that price is. And if there's a task that you're doing that is not making you that amount of money in revenue, then you need to either outsource it or get rid of it completely and shift in another direction. And if you constantly put everything you do through that filter, you will find that you'll feel good about your schedule. You'll feel good even if you're busy or overextended, because you're being remunerated. That suddenly feels balanced and your life is still feeling balanced. So there's a reward at the end of that. You don't feel like you're giving, and you're still not able to make your bills every month. You're still not able to make your overhead. Okay, so that's your advice for today. I hope that was helpful. Thank you again for joining us on the podcast Gaining Ground by Black Ram Media Group. My name is Daniela Sagia, and I'll see you again shortly. Go get 'em.